Hello and welcome to this special edition of the broadcast that we are bringing to you in collaboration with Voice of America. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Now, the White House has said that the United States was not involved in Wednesday's drone attack on the Kremlin. This after Russia claimed that the United States was the one that had masterminded the strike that was executed by Ukraine. The Voice of America's senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain gets you the story.
The White House says it is investigating an alleged drone attack late Wednesday on the Kremlin, which Russia claims was a failed attempt by Ukraine to assassinate Russian President Vladimir Putin. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby.
One thing I can tell you for certain is that the United States was not involved in this incident in any way, contrary to Mr. Peskov's lies. And that's what they are, just lies.
Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov blamed Kyiv and Washington earlier Thursday without providing any evidence of their involvement in the attack.
These attempts to disown this, both by Kyiv and by Washington, are, of course, absolutely ridiculous. We know very well that decisions about such actions, about such terrorist attacks, are made not in Kyiv, but in Washington, and Kyiv does what it is told to do.
At the International Criminal Court in The Hague on Thursday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy called for a war crimes investigation of Putin. On Wednesday, he said Ukraine was too busy defending itself from Russian attacks to launch such a strike on the Kremlin.
We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, enough weapons for this.
In Brussels, European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell had this warning for Moscow.
We call Russia not to use this alleged attack as an excuse to continue the escalation of the war. This is what worries us.
A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said all parties should refrain from any action that could further escalate the situation. And when asked about Beijing offering to mediate an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Wednesday the U.S. would welcome any country's efforts towards a just and durable peace. But he added,
But it has to begin with a couple of things. First, a clear understanding that in this instance, there's a victim and there's an aggressor. There's no moral equivalence between the two positions. And I have to say, until recently, it was very unclear whether China accepted that basic principle. I'm still not sure that they do, but at least President Xi has now had a conversation with President Zelenskyy.
China has thus far not called on Russia to withdraw its troops from Ukraine. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
And also to give us more analysis on this, we're being joined by Voice of America's Jessica Stone. She's joining us live from the White House in Washington, D.C. Now, Jessica, the Pentagon, interestingly, is providing another $300 million in terms of military aid to Ukraine. What is it buying?
Well, the Pentagon says it's going to buy artillery rounds, rockets, and of course, all of this is really part of the U.S. strategy to make Ukraine, to help Ukraine be in a position where it's really strong going into that spring offensive, which we expect any day now, really, over the next days or weeks. Moscow's offensive, meantime, in Ukraine has stalled, and this is the 37th time that Washington has advanced this type of military hardware, knowing in this case that Russians have dug in around especially those occupied territories. At the same time, we heard Nicholas Burns, the U.S. ambassador to China, saying this week that Washington has once again warned Beijing not to provide any lethal weapons to Russia. And at this point, we have no evidence that they've done so.
Interesting. Now, it's been a week since a phone call between China's President Xi Jinping and also Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Has Beijing made any progress on what it has called as the political settlement of the Ukraine crisis, and is there any change in Washington's position?
Well, two questions there. I think at this point we have no additional meetings to report about an advancement in those talks. But what we can say is that Washington does appear to be opening the door to increased acceptance, if you will, publicly of a potential China role in a resolution to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. In fact, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the Washington Post, quote, he welcomes China's efforts and, quote, they could be very beneficial. He also said Beijing's respect for sovereignty in that 12-point white paper that they issued as part of their peace plan does indicate or imply to him that potentially Beijing is seeking Russian troop withdrawal as a predilection or a pretext, a beginning point for having these types of talks. Now, at the same time, Washington does see Beijing as having enough leverage over Russia, especially in light of those crippling economic sanctions, to be able to force them not to continue the war if China takes a stance against its continuation in private talks.
Right.
And Blinken stressed, too, that Washington really does expect, and this explains the recent drawdown of more military aid, they want Ukraine to be in a position to be able to make battle wins on the battlefield ahead of any negotiations really getting started in earnest. Mohammed?
Absolutely, indeed. Jessica Stone, do continue to stay on with this because I want you to weigh in on another big story that we are tracking in this broadcast. Now, various polls show that American voters, including Democrats, do not want President Joe Biden to in fact run again in 2024, citing his age as the primary reason for this. And yet, he's almost certain to be the Democrat nominee, and the party appears to have very little doubt that he will win again. The White House's bureau chief, Patsy Widakuswara, gets you the reason behind this confidence. Take a look.
Freedom, personal freedom, is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
President Joe Biden wants a second term, despite low poll numbers and voters' concerns.
He's too old to be running for president. I mean, you're just too old, buddy. Sit it down and relax, retire.
Polls show 70% of Americans say Biden should not run again, including 51% of Democrats. About half cite his age as the reason. Biden is 80 and will be 86 at the end of a second term.
I respect them taking a hard look at it. I take a hard look at it as well. I took a hard look at it before I decided to run. And I feel good. I feel excited about the prospects.
Biden is betting that voters will focus more on his record in the pandemic recovery, job creation, and legislative achievement.
Let's go, Joe! Let's go, Joe!
With no serious Democratic rivals, he is almost guaranteed to win his party's nomination.
It's time to finish the job.
Why do Democrats believe Biden is their best guy? Because as a center-left candidate, he is the most likely to appeal to unaligned voters in the so-called swing states such as Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, where the 2024 election is likely to be decided. They believe he would have an advantage over the Republican nominee, whether it's Donald Trump, who is 76 and facing criminal charges.
MAGA is Make America Great Again, right?
Or someone like 44-year-old Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
The Republican Party has drifted so far to the right and their base has become so energized that there is no way that anybody can win the Republican primary as a moderate enough to sustain votes in the general election. They have to appeal to the most right populist viewpoints in the party to win the nomination, and that is just not a sustainable model for November to win a general election.
But the election is 18 months away, and much can happen until then, including what may be the Democrats' biggest fear, Biden falling ill or showing signs of frailty.
This just in.
Republicans have already launched their attack ad, depicting a future where the weakest president the country has had wins again.
This morning, an emboldened China invades Taiwan.
Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
And also Voice of America's Jessica Stone is still with us from the White House. And Jessica, President Biden this week ordered American troops to the southern border to help stem the tide of migrants from crossing over. Now, what's going on there, and how does this actually affect him politically?
Yeah, Mohammed, this all relates to a pandemic-era group of restrictions called Title 42 that basically prevented migrant crossings there's a backlog of tens of thousands of migrants basically at the border trying to get across, that they're expected to come after this pandemic era law is lifted on May 11th. And so the president has sent 1,500 American troops to the border to basically do administrative roles and help alleviate the burden on Border Patrol. But this is very politically vulnerable for him and his party because, of course, when President Trump did this, albeit he sent 5,200 troops to the border, this was viewed as a political stunt. It was viewed as an abuse of power. There was open criticism of it. And so the Biden White House is opening itself up again to that type of criticism, trying to take the position that they're strong on the border, but also that they're not racist or heavy-handed at the border. And so the line from the White House has essentially been, this is not the same type of situation. These troops are being sent to do administrative roles, even paper pushing type roles, not to take an active role with migrants themselves, just to alleviate some of the administrative duties that the Border Patrol has. That's what we're hearing from the White House spokesperson here.
All right, very interesting there. And also what is interesting this week, Jessica, is now the U.S. Congress needs to raise the national borrowing limit by the end of May. The President Joe Biden has invited the House Republicans to the White House to discuss raising the debt ceiling. So what's happening on this front, and what are the political implications here for Joe Biden?
Yeah, once again, ever since President Biden has announced his run for the White House, almost every step that this White House takes will also have to be viewed through the lens of political campaigning, and this is no different. He has taken the step forward to invite 4 of the top leaders from Congress to come next week to negotiate over the debt ceiling, although he's not talking about negotiating over the debt ceiling, because the White House position has been we won't negotiate over the debt ceiling. Essentially, we will not exchange raising the nation's borrowing limit for any types of spending cuts, which is the essential call by House Republicans and Leader McCarthy. What's happening here is Biden is trying to get a group to come to talk about budget issues and something more broad in an effort to get some friends and some friendly negotiators here at the White House. And one of those people is Senator Mitch McConnell. He is the Senate Minority Leader. He's someone with whom President Biden has previously been able to reach budget deals. And so the thinking here at the White House is by inviting more than just House Speaker McCarthy, that potentially a deal could be reached, an understanding could be reached. Meantime, Democrats in the House are also trying to come up with what's called a clean vehicle, a clean legislative vehicle to get a clean debt ceiling passed. But of course, the Republicans have the majority in the House, so it's unlikely that anything will pass more than a signal. But we'll have to see what comes out of those talks next week. What we've heard from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is that the deadline for making this decision in order not to run out of spending ability is June 1st. So we're just weeks away from that deadline, Mohammed.
All right, very interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Jessica Stone, for joining us from Washington, D.C. and getting us all those details there.